Welcome back to Third Rail Radio. We're going to have our interview with Camilo, who just performed his spoken word performance, if you were tuned in. If not, you should catch it on YouTube later this week. Number one, I guess introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Camilo Montoya, and I am here because my lovely sister Teresa connected me with Third Rail. She's a UMD student, not me.
What are the values that you hope people take away from your performances?
I was apologizing to you because of all the hectic stuff that was happening before the set started, and my sister actually was like, I think you're doing too much. And I was like, listen, yeah, definitely am. But I'm doing too much because in general, I feel like poetry is perceived as this like boring, soft section of English class.
Right.
Once a year, like a few weeks, you decode some dead white men's poetry. And yeah, that's exactly what it was for a long time. Or at least that's how poetry was reminded to me. And so I wanted to create a space where I could show that poetry can be fun. Poetry can make you feel things. Poetry can connect different aspects of your lives with the writers' lives. It can be moving and it can live beyond the paper, you know? My sister and I, we grew up in Nicaragua, and there was a lot of poetry there. I grew up doing performances at school. I grew up reading other people's poetry, but it was reading poetry. Whereas when we came to D.C., we live in Silver Spring, Maryland. When we came to this area, I found slam poetry, which is predominantly a black art, like African-American art, and it's a little more angry. It's a stage presence. That's what drives that poetry. So my writing is like a mix of the two, where I can grab from that pool of Latin American poets and their style and grab from this pool of American poets, American slam poets. And so I wanted to show sort of like a mix. What could we do in that sense? Break that gap between everyday people and poetry. And that's what the second piece was about, which was we're all poets.
Right.
As long as you feel, you're a poet. As long as you express it in some way, you're doing poetry. Poetry can show up in many ways.
That's really cool. It actually answers one of the questions I was going to ask you afterwards about how this idea came to be in your head, but that's a good answer. There.
Idea of the set or
of doing
of that
spoken word.
Yeah. Well, at first it was just yelling, like, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Like, were you there my junior year at Diversity Night by any chance?
Probably for part of it. I think I was. I remember.
Were you running,
your junior year was my senior year.
Yeah.
I might not have been there because I think I was already having the people below me. Yeah. I worked stage crew, for those of you who don't know, and Camilo was often on the stage and doing things around.
Yep.
We were both around the theater in high school.
Yeah, not theater kids.
Well, I would call myself a theater kid, but there's a reason I wasn't performing. Yes. But no, I follow you on Instagram too, so I've seen some of that.
Thank you.
And I know, you didn't have musicians at first. So how did that come to be?
You know, it's kind of like a big pushback against the energy I've been received at in like the DC poetry scene, because I go to a lot of open mics. There was a time in my life, maybe like a year ago, where I was going to open mics like every day of the week, at least 3 times a week.
Wow.
Performing, networking, shaping out pieces. And I always ran into 2 big barriers, which was older people, more experienced people telling me, you're not doing spoken word because spoken word is spoken.
Right.
And once I was told that I was hiding behind the music, so like stop doing that. And I also kept running into people being like, stop mixing English and Spanish. Stop doing that. Like, you're losing the audience when you do that. And maybe there's some truth to that, which is why, unfortunately, I've had to sort of like actively try to maybe say, what can I do in Spanish? What can I not do in Spanish so that the message still carries?
Right.
But the real reason why, and that's what you've seen on Instagram, is like I've kept pushing with the music around the poetry, is to show, no, I'm not hiding behind the music. The music just intensifies. The music just is like the water that holds the boat. But the boat itself and the wind is the poetry. But the water is the music. So we're coexisting together.
That's a very apt analogy. I think that describes it pretty well. I'd be curious, listeners, if you felt the same thing listening, because that was very emotional, evoking. I'm trying to think of words, but it did what you intended it to, is I think what I'm trying to say. So when you're writing these, did they all start out as poems? I know you mentioned one has started out just as a poem, or did some of them come to be already in your mind as spoken word.
Yeah, no. So I'm very strict on like everything I write is for the stage, purely spoken word. Once I've gone at least a few weeks, if not a few months, of like performing it and really refining it as a spoken piece, that's when I start thinking about the music. So, a lot of my writing, it's different stages, right? Like one piece could be in the writing for many months, and then in the performance part of it for a few weeks or a month or two. And then it's like, okay, well, how does this sound
Right.
when I'm with a musician? Because that's what I've learned. My really big regrets, and I mean, not regrets, but like my big weakness when I started working with musicians is that I was kind of wasting their time.
Right.
Because I didn't have the piece fully worked out. I didn't know the ins and outs of the piece. But once I have it, once I know what the piece is, once I know what the meaning behind it is, what everything around it is, then it becomes my instrument. So when you're jamming with a musician, you have to be clear on that.
Right.
So yeah, I made the mistake many times of trying to collaborate too early on.
Mm-hmm.
So now it's just flat out, just spoken word, perform, then think about music.
Yeah. And now you got a great crew of people performing with you, so I'm glad that's working out. It's very cool. For those of y'all who weren't there for the live performance, I wish you could have seen it, because they're like drums, and this is very different than most of the stuff we have on Third Rail, so it's very cool. Like usually we got, the guy on the drums, just the guy on the bass and the singer, and then the other guy on the guitar.
Yeah. And that's why I love these guys, bro. Milo, the guy who was on the keys, he's low-key band leader. He didn't establish, but he ended up being the one sort of proposing the most ideas and leading things. And the conversations we were having was, okay, this is crazy. Like, you think that if you join a band, you're free as a musician, but ultimately you're confined to the structure of a song.
Right.
You're confined to how songs are made.
Right.
And then, sure, if you want to get really out there and be like one of those like noise bands, that's different. But
we have had a few of those on Third Rail.
Gosh.
It's an interesting time.
Sorry for that. What they were realizing while they were playing with me, and it was my first time playing with all of them, was, oh, there is no structure.
Right.
Sure, we come up with phrases that we repeat, we come up with motifs that we come back to, but ultimately it's so free. And I'll tell you that I asked each of them, what's your background with music?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh, jazz, orchestra,
right.
Whatever, rock. And it's like, oh, now we get to be musicians. So it's
right.
very freeing for them because there's no way to do it.
What's coming up for you? Do you have any performance or other things you just want to tell people about?
Yes. Next Sunday, on the 22nd, I think that is, or 23rd, not sure. Sunday.
The 23rd.
Sunday the 23rd, from 3 to 5 p.m., I'm going to be reading at the American Poetry Museum, that's a big name it's a beautiful venue. Is right when you come out of the Brooklyn Metro stop on the Red Line.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally as soon as you step out, is right there. It's in the Brooklyn Arch Walk, which you may know, may not know. But yeah, from 3 to 5 p.m., I'll be reading. It'll be more of like a proper reading. There will be musicians, a little more jazzy,
mm-hmm.
but it won't be a set like this. This is like my set. We
right.
created this.
Right.
This one will be more like an improv.
Right.
While I read my different type of poetry, not this poetry.
Yeah. Well, listeners, you could go to that, and also Camilo is tagged on our Instagram, so you should be able to find his Instagram, and I assume other relevant links.
Yes, follow that
there.
boy. Follow that boy. That boy got no followers.
If you're curious, I don't think that's true. I think no followers is maybe a slight exaggeration or under exaggeration. Well, any parting words for our WNEC listeners or anyone listening at home that you want to say?
I love every single one of you that actually tuned in. I sent the link around a lot. I put a lot of flyers up. I think I did, like my sister said, do too much, perhaps. But I really care about what you guys do. I value what you do. I'm honored to be here. I'm grateful that it's so BCC run and that Barons will always rule the world.
Oh, God.
And that we honestly just can't escape it. Like, I didn't know you were running this. You know what I mean?
Well, if it makes sense, it's very theater adjacent. Like, that's why I'm here. I was doing sound at high school. Now I'm here. I'm doing essentially sound again.
Yeah, and I was doing video in high school. And
right.
I was like doing video. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, I'm just so grateful to be here and anybody who listens on the radio.
Thank you so much for coming on. Again, y'all can find his Instagram tagged in our Instagram. There'll be a video, I know, on your side too. I don't know exact. There will be both video coming out from us on our usual YouTube channel and from Camilo. So stay tuned for that. And listeners, stay tuned for our other band, Outer Loop, will be starting here in a little while. Thank you.
Prakata.